And I mean, I'll be able to put it up on YouTube. Damn it. It'll go out on Facebook if this continues to do what it's doing. It'll have to go out on Facebook and Periscope. Um, yeah, I have to cancel that there. Okay, going back to YouTube stream now. Set up manually. Stream key. Actually, it is streaming. and let's do this. YouTube's working on its own. Let's see if I can go here. Okay, people, so they did an update. Hope everybody can hear. They did an update to the YouTube software. I was doing some testing earlier with XSplit. So look, guys, I'm going to need you to work with me. Let me know if you can hear and see both me and my guest. If you can see my guest, say yes, or type yes, I should say. And same thing goes for me. Can you hear and see? Guest, could you say hello?
Hello, can you hear me and see me?
I could have used my phone, huh? Yeah, we sure could. Because it is a little bit of latency, I imagine, between us and them now that I think about it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to, but we're looking good. Let's see. And live.
Hello, can you hear me and see me?
Yeah, you're good, man. All right. So now let me kill this because we are good. All right, so this is going to be edited. This is going to be edited. And this is public stream because everybody's seeing me. Yeah, we're good. All right, guys, so I want to give it just a moment because I know people are ticked off. They thought it was going to be on Facebook and Periscope as well. But once it's here, it can be anywhere we put it. So that's not a big deal. As long as we got the footage, we are good, and it's live. So you're live right now. Let me share it, at least share it with people on Twitter real quick before I introduce my guest, because if not, I won't hear the end of it, because it actually was Twitter people who were very adamant about this show tonight. So let me tweet. Hey, guys. All right, guys, come over to YouTube to see the Tim Black show with special guest at Scott Santens. And here goes the link. And please retweet. And bam. This should be fine because I have no special clips. I'm not doing any clips. I'm not going to get fancy. All right, guys. Back to here. Enough of that stuff. No keyboard needed. Everything's live right in the face while I'm getting everything set up. Yeah,
I just retweeted you too.
Oh, thank you, Scott. I appreciate it. All right, guys. Hello, everybody. My name is Tim Black. Welcome to the Tim Black at Night Show. Glad you could tune in. Welcome just YouTube people. YouTube people in the house. I'm going to need you to share this on your social media. This is a show that is demanded by the people. By popular demand, I was told to get this guest. Now, you may recognize him. His name is Scott Santens, and he's a writer and advocate of basic income for all. Citizen of Earth in New Orleans.
That's right.
Bachelor of Science in Psychology, moderator of the Basic Income community on Reddit. He's an author as well, The Surviving the Machine, Intelligent Technology, and the Transformation of Human Work. And What Do We Do About Inequality? I love the title of that one. Ladies and gentlemen, give a warm welcome to my friend Scott Santens.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me, Tim.
That's it, man. Thank you for taking time out, man, and thank you for dealing with the technical glitches, man. I tell you, it's like they knew I was going to bring you on, Scott.
It's always that way. It's always that way.
You know what I mean? I live streamed yesterday, but no problem. Everything was normal. And then today, they wanted to throw a curveball. So I want to jump right into it, man, especially since we're running late, bro.
Okay.
So what brought you to UBI? Why are you such an advocate? You're one of the most one of the biggest proponents, most vocal proponents of UBI. What led you down that pathway?
Yeah, so I came into this in 2013. And so this was before the Oxford report came out. So like no one was really talking about the, automation, the future of work and this kind of thing. It just wasn't on anybody's radar. And it made the front page of Reddit. And the discussion was just about like, oh my gosh, people aren't really talking about this, but it's like a big deal. And so this thread I just thought was fascinating. And it led me to this book called Manna by Marshall Brain. And so this was like a short novella, science fiction. And I read that, and it just did a really good job of framing like this realistic scenario of where things could be going as far as automation goes, and how we basically have like a forked path we can take. It's like we can go down this one path, and things are going to get worse and worse and worse, pretty dystopian. Or we can leverage this technology, and we can take this utopian path and go like towards Star Trek. And so when I framed it in this way, and I started looking. He wrote something else called Robotic Nation, and in that he talked about a basic income. I was like, well, that's interesting. So I started looking into basic income, and I didn't know about all this history that happened like in the U.S. in the 70s. I had no idea that Nixon had like a version of it that he had proposed, and it had gotten close in the House of Representatives, passing it twice. It didn't make it through the Senate. Like I didn't realize that Martin Luther King was talking about it before he was killed. I didn't realize that there's like a argument for this that went all the way back to Thomas Paine. I didn't realize that there were all these experiments, not only in the US, but in Canada, where they had like a saturation site where essentially an entire town eliminated poverty for about 5 years. I didn't know about like the experiments in India and Namibia and all the unconditional cash transfer stuff. So I just like absorbed this like crazy because I'm huge into science and I love that. And this evidence just really got to me. So this idea that was from like how do we get to like this better future became like why didn't we do this decades, if not centuries ago? Because according to like the evidence, this will like improve a lot of different things across a lot of different measures for society. And then it even got to, well, there's even like economic rights arguments for this. There's like essentially human rights kind of arguments for this, as in this is extremely important that we can end poverty. And it's just like a choice that we're not. And it's just extremely expensive and wasteful. And there's just so many reasons for it that I just like realized that once I got to the point, I've got to invest all my time in this and try to make this happen, because it's just such like kind of a pivot kind of lever kind of idea that can like move the world if we can get this going.
I see. It's very interesting, and I can see. I mean, it sounds like you're an honest actor, that you have a fundamental pursuit. You want a better world, and you think this is a means of getting to that better world. Let me ask, what is your upbringing like? What was your social economic condition that led you to this? Were you from working class family? Were you from a well-to-do family? Were you, adopted? Like what was your circumstances?
Yeah, so I was raised in a pretty solid middle class family. I was raised in the Air Force. My dad was, so it was a military family. Moved a lot of different places growing up. So I've lived in a lot of places, and nothing really felt like home, I think, because of it. And then eventually I found New Orleans, and this place felt like home. But growing up, yeah, it was just very middle class. And I guess one thing kind of different about it too is being raised in the military is that I guess universal healthcare was kind of already like part of my life. So it's not like, we weren't rich or anything. We went to totally standard, middle class kind of schools. And But I guess when it came to
Public schools.
yeah, public schools,
Hmm.
yeah.
Hmm.
And when it came to healthcare, it was like if anything happened, we could go to the base and get free care essentially, and didn't have to worry about that. So that was, I think, something different for me. Is like for me, it's always seemed like why doesn't everybody have healthcare? Because that was just something that we had, and so that's something a little bit different. But the really the thing is that I've been part of a lot of different communities, and just there's a lot of regional differences, and I got to meet a lot of different people and experience a lot of different things. So I pretty consider myself lucky for that, both living domestically and overseas as well.
Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing that, Scott, because a lot of times when we have these types of conversations, you know, you have to know where someone's coming from to kind of know their life experience, what motivated them. Like my upbringing was different. Middle class, lower middle class. My stepdad was a construction worker. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, but she did flea marketing and babysitting kids. We brought in foster kids, that type of thing. Shopped at thrift stores growing up. I've been working ever since I was 10, and I left home when I was 16. And I was in high school, trying to make it out in the streets. So
Right.
everyone comes from a different vantage point. So let's just jump to it. Is there a difference? Because I don't want to mischaracterize you. With Andrew Yang, his freedom dividend, is there any fundamental, any big difference between that and what you would say UBI is at its core, or are they pretty much the same?
Oh yeah, yeah. So he's talking about a universal basic income. It's if you read the plan that I created for what I consider to be like an optimal plan that I published back in like I think it was 2015 or 2016, something like that. Um, there's a lot of similarities. So even I included a 10% VAT in my plan. I also included carbon taxation in my plan and a financial transaction tax in my plan. But the main component. So I guess let's define universal basic income really, so people understand like what the components are that it needs to have. So the essential components are the primarily needs to be unconditional. Unconditional meaning that there is no work requirement for it, and you get it whether you're rich or poor, and you get it whether you're working or not working. So it's always there.
Hmm.
It's universal. Uh, Goes to the entire community, however you want to define that. And it's individual. So it goes to the individual person and not, say, the household. And it's in the form of a regular cash allotment. So regular is it needs to be, every month usually, or every 2 weeks or something like that. It's not really often enough. It's if it's once a year, that's not really regular enough. So
Okay.
that's regularity is important, and of course it's cash. So you can't do benefits in kind. That's not the income part. So those are really what define a UBI, an unconditional basic income, and that's what Yang's is. What it does is it creates this floor, and the floor of Yang's proposal is at $1,000, and that's also what I've always talked about starting at as well as $1,000 per month. And I talk about that because we just define the federal poverty line in the U.S. as being around $12,000 per year.
Well, yeah, that was one of the first things that was brought up by a number of my visitors. They say, "Well, Tim, that poverty line. How did you come to that conclusion?" I guess you just
Yeah.
answered that. But that's based on like numbers from what 1965 or something. Isn't that like an old barometer or measurement for what the poverty line is?
Yeah. So the way that they define the poverty line is interesting. It's basically like they figured out like the amount that you would need for an average like month of food, and then they like multiplied it by three, and that was just like the equation they came up with, and that's what we've stuck with. So like I believe that we do need to, of course, get a better measure of poverty, but the fact is that all the programs that we have right now are designed around that line. So I just think it makes sense to start there because again, the most important aspect of UBI is the unconditionality. So I would even be okay, with like a $500 per month UBI. I'd be okay with an $800 a month UBI. Like the amount isn't necessarily as much. It's saying that no matter what, you will never fall below this level. and you can always count on that stable amount of income every month. You can count on that because that gives you that security, and you can plan around that. And that's really where a lot of the power comes from, is that unconditionality. Now, the better, like I would prefer that it gets higher. And even though I'd say start at 1,000, I would like to go from there too over time, especially as automation actually grows our productivity. I think we should essentially index the UBI to productivity. So essentially, it's almost like you could say the UBI should be 20% of GDP or something like that. That should be like the amount, and it goes up over time. So as automation eliminates more and more labor, then you could say we could look at a future decades from now where people are essentially earning the equivalent of, say, $4,000 or $5,000 per month, right, in today's dollars. But that would be an unconditional amount over time, provided by productivity, provided by automation.
Okay. One of the sticking points for me with this is I look at it like, well, first of all, when you say, the unconditionality of it, right? I have a hard time understanding why we need to placate those who don't need it, those who, basically speaking, may not even spend it. Because one of the selling points is, when I hear Yang talk about it, well, it's going to go right back into the economy and it's going to generate new jobs. Well, not if it's not spent. Not if it's going to people who don't need the sustenance of the UBI in order to live or pay bills. Why would you not take that money and reallocate it to those who actually are needy?
Okay, so yeah, this is a really interesting part of this. Is there's a few aspects of this. So even so, the way that you just spoke about that, and you used the word needy. So then the question is, how do you define needy? And so we were just talking about how we define, the poverty line. But then there's a lot of people who are needy who are above the poverty line. And the fact is that the way we design our programs, there are a lot of needy people who are not receiving what they need to because we've decided that they're not needy. So every time that we use means testing and we target people, we are drawing this arbitrary line. And then there's always people on the other side of that line. So that's one reason why universality is so important. So one way of looking at this, actually, and understanding it well, is looking at disability. So if you look at the number of people with disabilities in the U.S., about 1 out of 5 people with a disability is receiving a form of disability income.
Right.
And so 4 out of 5 people with disability are left to compete with the fully able people in the labor market. They're not getting any assistance, any extra assistance whatsoever. And so that's a lot of people. And then, of course, you look at the system that they go through, and this is really messed up, I think, is that those who are going through the disability system, on average, there are right now over 1 million people who are waiting to prove that they're sufficiently disabled, and the average wait is over 2 years.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
So it's just like, it's crazy to think about that. And so there's that part, but there's also, you're looking at, let's say, the way that we go about the funding mechanism. And so this is something I think a lot of people don't quite understand right off the bat, is that there's net recipients and then there's net payers. So if you're like a Bill Gates, like people worry, oh, why are we giving Bill Gates $1,000 a month, right? It doesn't make any sense to give them an extra money.
Or LeBron James, or
Jay-Z,
or
LeBron James.
A lot of other people. Yeah. Not just Bill Gates, but anybody making over, I don't know, $50,000 a year.
Right.
2 parent
so the
household.
Thing is,
right.
So pretty much any way that you design a UBI that's built in a tax and transfer system is going to be taxing those at the top more than they're receiving. So essentially, if you're a Bill Gates and we introduce a UBI, then Bill Gates, let's say, is paying an extra $50,000, $100,000, $1 million, depending on how you design the taxation side of the UBI. And he's still receiving that back, but of course he's a net payer by a large amount. So effectively, he's, instead of paying an extra, $100,000 per year in taxes, essentially the $12,000 is a small tax credit that he receives just like everybody else. So it's actually, like $88,000 instead of the $100,000. So he's still paying a lot more in taxes than he otherwise would. It's just we're able to design this system that he actually, and the rest of the rich and stuff, actually can support, because it's a fully universal system. We know that universal systems are far less likely to be attacked and successfully eroded by politicians and governments because, let's say, have you heard the term that programs for the poor are programs? Like if you feel that you're not benefiting from it, then there's a lot of ability to erode that. And so, like, if you look at something like in Alaska, where everyone receives a dividend no matter how much they earn, then it's actually a very solid, stable program. Whereas if they had, say, decided in 1984, at some point in the 80s and said, well, let's actually restrict this. Instead of giving it to everybody, let's give this to only the bottom 30% or something. Like, would the program still exist today?
I don't think
so.
Scott, and I hear you about the Alaska, and I've heard, Andrew Yang use that example many times. He talks about the dividend that Alaskans get, but I have a friend from Alaska. Her name is Laura. She calls the show often, and she says, well, that dividend, it's because of the oil that comes out of the ground that is in our state. So it's actually because of their locations, because of the resources that they actually have in their state that they get this dividend. But that the poor people don't substantially benefit from it because, well, it's mitigated, it's compared against, any type of other assistance that they get. So if they're already financially strapped and they get food stamps, well, they don't get that money on top. So they may get 6 weeks or 8 weeks where they get no food stamps. So now the money that's for the dividend is just a way to correct the shortfall that was created by the dividend. So it really doesn't help them. I don't think that's a good example of this thing working. I think it's something Yang uses, but he never lists, my friend from Alaska who doesn't benefit at all from it. In fact, it causes her to have to refile for food stamps after 6 to 8 weeks every year. She has to do that.
Yeah, these are problems with, again, the conditionality of our federal welfare systems and like how we actually draw money away and benefits away as people earn additional income. Like that is a problem with the way these things are designed, which is why it's important to be universal because they aren't withdrawn. But we also know that if you look at poverty and inequality in Alaska, post-dividend, we know that it's actually decreased poverty and decreased inequality in Alaska. And Alaska even has a higher cost of living. So if you look at the way they define poverty in Alaska, it's actually higher. So it makes a big difference there to people, and they count on it like a lot. It goes to, it tends to buy a lot of durable goods. So let's say people will use it to buy like a new dishwasher, washing machine or something, or they'll put it to pay down debts or pay down or build up savings or put into their kids' college education funds, these kinds of things. And it actually has created a lot of jobs there. And there's a recent analysis done that was really, I thought, pretty fascinating, where they created what they call the synthetic Alaska, because of course you can't really run an experiment and say what if Alaska had not created the dividend. And then, what if it did? So we can't really do that, but they did what they could to model that. And using this synthetic Alaska, it determined that there was not an increase in full-time employment. Effectively, there was a slight decrease in full-time employment, but then also the spending of the money created new jobs, which enabled people to take those jobs that they wouldn't have otherwise been able to do. There was actually no net impact on full-time employment, but there was a 17% increase in part-time employment. So it enabled people to actually take jobs they wouldn't otherwise have been able to do in a part-time basis. So I thought that was really interesting. And it's made a more stable economy in Alaska than they would otherwise, because it has that kind of baseline income that everyone can always count on. So there's a lot of actually really interesting things.
You said there's a report that found that this makes the economy more stable. But you just said there was no way to measure what life would be without it. But now it's more
we're
stable.
Modeling. This is the wonders of economics, where you just got to go with the models that you can create, and you see what they look like afterwards.
It sounds like you can kind of, they say numbers can say whatever you want them to say at the end of the day. I recommend looking at the paper. It's really interesting. Okay. So how would the implementation of UBI and say for poor Americans when the monthly UBI is considered income? And how would that impact the government safety nets that already exist? Just putting Alaska aside, but generally speaking, if you are a person, I noticed that there are certain, like if you get Social Security, it stacks on Social Security, right?
Right.
But there are other government safety nets that it does not stack to, like SNAP, for instance.
Yeah.
Right.
So the way that Yang has proposed his freedom dividend is to be opt-in, and so you would. This is basically looking at contributory programs versus, say, means-tested, income-based programs. So if you look at SNAP, if you look at WIC, and if you look at TANF, like these programs and SSI, these programs would not stack with it. But Social Security disability, veterans disability, like these programs would stack on top of it. And I think it's actually an important element of the design because then you don't want to stack conditionality onto unconditionality. Because you have a lot of, like TANF, I think is like the worst case scenario. And this is like one of those things where people don't understand the way TANF works. Also, even if they've been on it, they may not necessarily know because it varies a lot by states. The way it works is a block grant. So the federal government provides a block grant to the states, and then the state can decide how they want to distribute this cash assistance. And they can choose how much they want to provide of that block as cash assistance. And they can choose to do other things that qualify as acceptable uses of that money. And
Conditions.
the acceptable uses of that money has really gotten out of whack in the past decades. This happened under Clinton, so it's been in existence.
Yeah, with the whole
since,
welfare queen thing. Yeah, with the stigmatizing of poor people and particularly single mothers.
Yeah. So right now in across the country, 23% of those living in poverty receive this TANF, and this, of course, varies by state. So if you look at in Louisiana, where I am, for every 100 families living in poverty who qualify for TANF, 4 families receive TANF assistance.
Wow.
And so this is just, it's like a safety net with massive holes that people are falling through. And then the conditions that they apply are actually outright racist, that are in effectiveness. And so it's illegal to do that. You can't actually make a racist, federal program. You can't, adjust based on color. But they get around that because the states are able to, determine these things. So there was a study that looked at these by states, and you found that the states with a higher proportion of Black people receiving TANF, they had a lot more strings attached. And then if you look at the states with disproportionately more white people comparatively, then those had a lot fewer strings attached. And so these strings can actually be pretty damaging, to the point where they found that in the worst case scenarios, if you go through these programs and you jump through the hoops that you're told to get your TANF assistance, then you can actually end up worse off than had you not gotten it in the first place.
Wow.
So, and they even found, worst of all, is that TANF is responsible for 15% of the white-Black child poverty gap in the U.S. So, like, it's actually growing inequality in the U.S. And that to me is just crazy. So I want to make sure.
So does UBI lessen the income gap, the racial wealth gap that exists now? Does the freedom dividend mitigate that, or does it solve it?
Yeah. So the problem with TANF, and this is actually a way of getting from, you can think about getting from TANF to like a UBI, is that the way to fix TANF is to get rid of those conditions. So those conditions would be that, you don't have to prove that you're working, or looking for work 20 hours or 30 hours a week or whatever, that you're free to do anything you want to. And that, of course, because it's not varying for more conditions for the Black population and fewer conditions of the white population, and make sure that all the conditions are equal because there are no conditions, then you're not going to see those effects that make that divide bigger. And then you have to think, okay, so how do we fix TANF besides that? Well, then you can't really target it. You have to say, okay, instead of just being for the poor, we have to expand that out, and flatten it and equalize it and remove all those conditions. And then you've got yourself a very low UBI. So that's what you need to do with, SNAP and WIC and these others as well. So the reason that it makes sense to have Yang's opt-in is because then you're just getting that fully unconditional $1,000 per month. You're no longer having to jump through those hoops. You're not having to prove that you're seeking work 30 hours a week. And that can be like, it's crazy how counterintuitive these things can be. Like let's say I have an example in the article I wrote about the freedom dividend, where it's like, I think a woman who was on food stamps. And so part of her condition was that she needed to drive to this like work search office every day.
Mm-hmm.
And it was effectively like a job, so she's doing like 8 hours a day, effectively doing this job, and she's earning $5 a day in food stamps. And so it's just, you could look at that as slave labor. It's just, completely cents, per hour. You're not actually looking for any, you're preventing someone from actually building new skills, from pursuing something that she could find on her own.
But don't get me wrong, Scott. Not to cut you off, but don't get me wrong, Scott.
Okay.
I'm not arguing the veracity of our current programs.
Yeah.
Right? They need a lot of work, so I'm not defending them at all. Right? What I'm saying is that, well, why not just focus the resources on the people that you just described in your article? Why, to me, the argument that we want to make more well-to-do folks, let's just say it, well-to-do white folks, feel more comfortable with this UBI so that we can get it passed. But I don't think that's the way that you will actually help the most amount of people, by somehow pacifying and placating those who don't really need it. Why not we just give it to those single moms? Why don't we just give it to the veterans who are struggling? Why not we just give it to these folks in West Virginia and Appalachia? They're poor white people too. And won't we just focus on that? Because there will always be people who won't go along with it. They, based on the propaganda that's been devised in this country about poor people, it's their fault. It's a derived, it's a character flaw that you are born poor, even though we know that's the biggest indicator if you will die poor is if you're born poor. For some reason, that has never truly surfaced as being the reason. People come up with other reasons. So my point is, I still don't see why we don't just focus and take the hit. I mean, if we can say, if we can have any way we want it to be, why not just make it be written for those people who most need it?
Yeah. So again, it's this. We're defining who most needs it. We're drawing that line.
Unemployed single moms, the veterans you described, all these people you just described to me in those articles you've written.
But we can't determine it using a number, and we can't determine it using a status of some kind. Like with disability, how do you define what is sufficiently disabled? You're always going to leave out people who are not sufficiently disabled.
They're being left out now, Scott.
Right. And so, but they shouldn't be. We should actually provide a floor under everybody. We should make sure that we essentially abolish poverty. And this is actually how MLK referred to it too. I mean, he actually compared the existence of poverty to being like cannibalism.
A moral bankruptcy, yes.
And so he defined it as saying that there's no justification for poverty in this age. And so I completely agree with that. There is no justification for poverty. We should make sure that everybody at any point never falls below however we define the poverty line, at least as a starting point. We should, that's what we should aim for. So we should make sure that nobody ever falls below $1,000 a month, ever. And so anything can happen. You could be rich, you could be well off, and you could fall at any point. Anybody can do that. And also, it's not only about the amount, but it's about the fear of falling into that. And so there is a lot of abuse that goes on in society in these relationships that are abusive, and this can happen in our interpersonal relationships. This can also happen in our employee relationships.
Mm-hmm.
We can do things that we wouldn't otherwise do because we fear what might happen.
Yeah, the stress of being poor.
Yeah, so the effectively the existence of poverty is used as a stick to make people do things that they wouldn't otherwise do. We're coercing people to do things they wouldn't otherwise do. And so this is also about this granting of power, where people they have the power to say no now. Then they're not afraid of falling into poverty because it's essentially a right of citizenship that they will not do that. If you're starting every month with $1,000 per month unconditionally, then you can choose what work you're going to do, what wages you're going to work for, how many hours you're going to work. You can even choose unpaid work. You can decide, hey, this is valuable. Now the market doesn't value it, at least now, but I consider it to be valuable, and this is how I want to spend my time. So you can make decisions like that, and you can use that against employers. You can say, hey, I will not work for you for $10 an hour. But I will work for you for $20 an hour. And if you don't offer me that, then I'm not going to do it. And so, if enough people have, everyone has a basic income, then this can actually raise wages for work that is actually really exploiting people right now. And they're exploiting people successfully because people are afraid of poverty and what will happen if they fall into it. And on the other hand, you actually subsidize this work that people can't necessarily afford to do. Like, how many people really can't afford to volunteer? How many people can't afford to, let's say, work as a teacher, because a teacher only gets, say, 30K, but they really need 50 or 60K. So they do something, they work for an oil company and they feel terrible about it, but like they're doing it for the money. And so it creates a lot more options for people to have. And also there's this stress of even feeling that you might go into poverty has a lot of societal effects as well. And this goes into inequality and stress. And this is like, this instability and this rising insecurity that happens. And we're seeing it all around us. And I believe that this rising insecurity led to Trump's election as well.
Yeah. You got President Obama, building out Wall Street and the banks, repeatedly, and now building out Main Street, which led to it as well. And the hope and change not actually adding up to be more than just change, and the change in the form of less than $1. But I got a couple people. Let me jump in because I got a couple people with a couple questions. One of them is, somebody wrote me this long email, right, Scott? And they were like, hey, Tim, you need to be for this. You need to jump on this bandwagon, be for Scott, support Andrew Yang, because I know I'm a single mom and I got 4 kids, and $4,000 would really help me. And so I'm thinking there's a loss in translation here where some people are thinking this is a little bit sweeter than it is. She doesn't know that she would only get $1,000 for her. And if she's receiving benefits for those kids, and correct me if I'm wrong, that would also be deducted from her $1,000. And if she opts out, if the VAT tax goes into effect, she could be paying for someone else's $1,000.
Yeah. Okay. So this varies a lot depending on the situation. And so, like, I don't know the age of her kids. Like,
under 18. Anybody under 18, right?
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
So, but some people do have kids that they're living with who are over 18. So, I mean, that could be part of this as well. But if she has 3 kids and they're all under 18, and depending on what state she lives in and how much that she's getting, this will be a decision for her to make. Is that, does she want to let's say she's getting more. So let's say she's getting $1,100 per month right now between, say, TANF and SNAP or something. Mm-hmm. So she's above the line, and she gets to choose that or the $1,000. So there's a if you look at it by an amount, it's $100 difference, and so maybe she would want to choose that higher amount anyways, or she might look at this and go, I don't want to keep going to this, job search office 30 hours a week. It's ridiculous. I want to get rid of these conditions. And so I want that time back. And that's another element of this, is the time that you receive, because the $1,000 a month that she would get is fully unconditional, whereas what she's receiving right now is full of these conditions. So she might make that decision. And in fact, if you ask people this and they have some of the worst conditions, they're going to say, oh, absolutely, I would take the $1,000 unconditionally because I'm sick of dealing with the social workers. I'm sick of all the bureaucracy. I'm sick of the conditions I have to go through. I don't want anything to do with it anymore. I'd rather blow myself blow my head off with a gun. And that was like actually a quote, but this was a survey that a social worker has done, asked people this question. And like, that was one of the answers. Like, it's these conditions the way that the system is work is just makes people so miserable. And that's part of it. Like the system wants people to be miserable. It wants to
to force
kind
you
of
to
use that.
they want to
right,
make it
to
arduous,
force you out of it.
Right, to force you off of it. But it's also important, like everyone, you heard that, because Scott didn't disagree. It's like, no, it's and so why not, if you're making a program, Scott?
Oh yeah,
if you're making a program, Scott, why not make it so that the children are included? Like, why?
Oh no, so I read about this. I talk about this a lot. Even is that if you were to ask me the one way to improve Yang's program, the one thing you could do that would improve it the most is to add a child allowance. And I think that's an important element because our poverty line is defined by a scaling household amount. So essentially, each additional member of the household requires another around $4,000 per year. And so I believe that the best design is to actually scale by having each kid have a $4,000 per month child component that is added on top of it.
Sounds like an earned income credit type of thing.
Yeah, so essentially you'd be taking like the child tax credit.
Tax credit, I'm sorry. Yeah.
You'd be doubling the child tax credit and you make it fully refundable and you universalize it. That would be a way of doing it. And it could actually be fairly revenue neutral because you could also, you could reform EITC and CTC as part of this. And you wouldn't really spend as much additional money as we'd need for everything else. But I do think that I would improve that and it would make it so that you're not essentially benefiting single adults more so than families, which is the way the existing system is built around. So yeah, I agree with that I think that it could be improved that way. But as it is, it's still a much better system than we have right now. So I want something that vastly improves things for most people. And this would be a vast improvement. This would decrease poverty by 75% and for disposable, based on disposable incomes. And so
Hold on, Scott. You said this would decrease poverty by 75%?
Yes.
How is it decreasing poverty if people who are getting government assistance will have cuts in their government assistance that will could basically put them right where they are now, give or take a couple of $100 like you just described in that example?
Okay, so you have to look at how many people are excluded and what people are getting. So right now, if you look at what people are getting, you're averaging, someone can say be getting around $500, $600, $700 per month. They're not getting $1,000 per month. Okay. So if you look at those people living under the poverty line, you would be lifting most of those. The only people that aren't really lifted higher are those with a larger amount of kids because of the lack of the child component part of it. But most people would be lifted. And also the fact is that so many people are falling through the safety net that right now, if you look at those in poverty, 13 million people living in poverty in the United States right now are entirely disconnected from the federal safety net. So these are 13 million people living in poverty getting nothing right now that suddenly get $1,000 per month because it's fully unconditional. That's where a lot of this decrease to poverty comes from, is just this lifting. You can imagine like filling up the water, like the rising up boats kind of thing. Where so many people right now are far below that line, and you're lifting up everybody to that $1,000 line, and now nobody ever falls beneath $1,000. Whereas right now, lots and lots of people are below that line.
I agree. Now, of course, this brings us to where, this is a capitalistic society, so landlords, retailers, everyone knows now Scott and Andrew Yang got this thing passed, and everybody's got all this money now. So how do we mitigate the landlords increasing rents? How do we mitigate retailers upping their prices for goods and services based on this new enacted law, the UBI?
Yeah. So the question of inflation is definitely the most thought first response to hearing about basic income, which I think is really interesting. That the first thought, people getting more money, is that there's kind of no point to it.
No, it's a point to it. It's a point to it. Yeah, but I just think it needs to be more surgical. That's all.
Yeah. So here's the thing. That there's a lot of variables to the inflation equation, and I think that the main thing that people don't understand when they first hear about this and they assume that, is again, they're thinking that you're essentially inflating the money supply, that you're creating a lot more new dollars, and then you're putting those dollars, raining it down over everybody. And so essentially, you've got a lot more money in the money supply chasing the same amount of goods and services. And so then it makes sense that, oh, well, if there's a lot more money chasing the same stuff, then you're going to have to raise prices. That makes sense. So the taxation side of the basic income is not really part of that kind of fear. So we're actually taxing and transferring. We're taking money that's essentially not being spent at the top. It's circulating around there, essentially doing nothing, I would argue, except for inflating prices at the top, inflating stock markets and these kinds of things. You're taking that money there and you're circulating it down to the bottom and middle. And so this is not an inflation of the money supply. This is just a transferred amount of money. It's not more money in the total economy. And so that's the main thing to understand. The second thing is that competition still exists with a basic income. And in fact, you could argue that it's enhanced because of all the evidence that shows that entrepreneurship is enhanced because of it, and that people having more money leads to more customers. So that's one thing. But competition still exists. And so imagine you're a store and everyone has this extra money, like there's more income in society.
Right.
So you say, well, okay, I'm going to raise my prices. Like, let's say if you look at milk, milk where I am is like $4 per gallon. So let's say I'm a Milk Star owner and I say, I'm going to raise this to $8 per gallon, because everybody's got more money. And then my competitor says, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to keep it at $4. In fact, I'm going to do a sale, and my milk is going to be 2 for $6. And so suddenly, it was a really bad move to do that, and that person can go out of business because that they decided to get greedy. And you actually see this, like in Alaska, every time you distribute the income at the end of the year, there are actually, instead of people raising prices, every business store owner in Alaska knows that when the dividend goes out, there's a lot of money out there to spend. And so what do? Well, sales go up everywhere. It's like Christmas time. Like, that people are spending money. And you want to attract that money to you. You want them to spend the dollars at your place, not the other person's place. So there's competition going on. And it's a really bad idea to neglect that and ignore it and think that you can just take that money for yours by doing that. So then that's another aspect of this. But then there's also aspects like you can look at, say, the like your manufacturing capacity output. So right now, we are not anywhere near our manufacturing capacity. And so when you inject more demand into the economy, people can buy more things. And that's fine as long as you can still, create that, the supply to meet that demand. And as long as you don't exceed that supply, then you can actually do that. So right now, like we're at around 70, 80% of our manufacturing output. So we can actually create more stuff just fine. And if you look at, like, this varies by goods too. So of course, there's no limit to the amount of digital goods you can create. There's no limit to that. So there's no reason to raise prices on that. There is reason to raise prices on things that cannot be ramped up. So let's say you're looking at like a luxury handmade item or something. And so there's a lot more people wanting that scarce kind of item. And then so that price can go up. So you can expect prices to go up on these kind of luxury goods. But then also there can be a time component to that as well. So let's say prices go up immediately. Well, the person selling that good is going to want to sell more of it. So they're going to ramp up their supply in order to meet that demand. Mm-hmm. And so as that demand ramps up and as other market players come in and say, well, I want some of that action too, that I can sell this item that's really more expensive. So I'm going to do that. And as that supply increases, then you find a new equilibrium. And so that price can temporarily go up and then go back down as that supply exists to meet that demand. And so that's another aspect. And there's another aspect they called inferior goods. I think this is a kind of an interesting example where there's a lot of stuff that we buy and at the prices they are because they're really cheap, but also they kind of suck, and they let's say they wear out really quickly. So an example of this, like I a few years ago got a couch from Walmart, and this is when my fiance and I didn't really have a whole lot of extra spending money, but we needed a couch. So we got this couch, and it was like the most affordable one we could find. I think it was like $400 or something like that. And that couch lasted like literally less than 2 years.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Like it just basically fell apart. And so if we had a little bit more money, we could have bought, say, $1,000 couch, and we would still have it. And so there's a lot of goods out there that people are only buying because of this, and they're not buying these more durable goods that they would otherwise want.
Mm-hmm.
So there's almost like there's a false demand for this stuff that people only have a demand for because there's not enough money. And then another example I think is interesting is that increased demand can actually like greatly increase supply to the point where prices like can really plummet. An example of this is, say, eggs and chickens. So let's say eggs are really expensive, and then everybody gets a basic income. And so you would think, oh, well, let's say eggs are $1 a piece. And so now all of a sudden you can, pay more for eggs. But then people go, wait a second, I'm just going to buy a chicken. And so lots of people buy chickens, and they start making all these eggs. And so suddenly there's like a massive supply of eggs. So the price of eggs plummets. And so that's another thing. And then that's an example of things getting really cheap. But then let's take a look at rents. And so this is something that people are really concerned about too. So when it comes to rents, there's effectively not really a lot of competition between landlords because you're kind of in like these location kind of bubbles where people are locked there because of their jobs. What's really interesting about basic income is that suddenly people can move anywhere they want to, or their ability to move is greatly enhanced beyond what it is right now. So let's say right now, your landlord wants to raise the rent. Well, you got to be near your job. And so you just say, all right, fine, I'll pay more. I don't have any ability to say no. But if you have an unconditional basic income, then you can say, well, wait a second. I'm actually kind of tired of living in this area where the rents are just crazy. And I have this income, and my partner has this income. And because of that, I think we can take the risk of like going to like a lower cost of living area. We're going to move away from the city, go to something more affordable. And if you do that, and there's a lot of people doing that, then suddenly you reduce pressure on housing in cities. And also you increase the ability to buy houses. You increase the ability to become, your homeowner. And this was actually an effect that was observed in the experiments in the 70s. And this was a surprising effect, actually, because this was a temporary experiment. So you can imagine they didn't expect that someone would get a 30-year mortgage knowing that they were going to be part of an experiment for 5 years where they got some extra money for 5 years. Why would you do that if it's only for 5 years instead of 30? But housing home ownership went up 4 to 6% despite that in this short amount of time. And so that was for an experiment, and that was back then with the essentially like a lower amount. So I would expect that home ownership rates could increase now by over that amount.
Wow.
We could see a home ownership rates go up, say 8 to 10% or something, because people are able to do that. So that pushes down our rent prices as well. And then the other thing about rent too is that there's not really a market right now for really affordable homes. Let's say as a person wanting to get into that, if you're low income, then your income is really irregular, and it's hard to secure a home and people don't want to effectively rent to you if they don't know if you're going to be able to pay the rent. So it's one of the reasons why this low affordable housing is so difficult. And so if everybody is guaranteed that $1,000 per month, then actually creates a market where a market doesn't really exist, where people can actually create more affordable homes and know that people will always have enough to pay that rent. And if you make it cheap enough, then you can actually, I can imagine like another someone becoming a billionaire out of deciding to create like a way of making affordable homes, knowing that there's a giant market for people for that. So there's a lot of different variables to this equation. I think it's really interesting to look at.
Yeah. Wow, that was a lot. And like I stated, man, of course, I'm sure many others really don't have an argument against people getting more money, or people having a floor underneath them, so they only fall so far. But maybe it'd be better if I just read a couple of these questions.
Sure.
Michael Cruz wants to know, why do you believe $1,000 per month is an indebted person per month to an indebted person who will likely spend it paying bills, causing it to be spent as quickly as they got it? Should it be in the same program as an indebted person who will take that same $1,000 and invest it? You kind of already answered that question. Actually, I think you did answer it. But strictly to Mike, what would you say to Mike? Like, his brother's doing well, he's not doing well. Why do they have to be in the same program? Like this, very simply, a few words, why does that make sense to Mike? That his brother, who's good, he's fine, man. He lucked out. He got the great IT job. He's got, he's backing up servers, making six figures. And Mike, poor Mike, he did some time. I don't know, he got caught with some marijuana because he's a Latino dude. His last name's Cruz. Maybe he got racially profiled. And this is his situation. It's hard for him to find a job. He's pushing a broom somewhere and not making a lot. Why should both brothers get the same thing?
Yeah, well, both brothers are citizens of the United States. They both are human beings. They both have the same right to this amount. And also, I think there's a matter of fairness to this. And I think that when it comes to, say, debt, like let's look at
fairness,
college.
Scott, fairness.
Yeah.
In America, we're talking about fairness.
Well, let me explain what I mean by that. So let's look at college loans. So let's say one brother went to college and now they're in debt $100K, let's say. And now they're, let's say they were unable to find like a really good job. Let's say they have a slightly better job or something. So let's say they're earning. Now
let's take the scenario I just gave you. Take the scenario where I gave you, where Mike's brother went to college. He went to college to get that, to get the training, to get the IT job. There you go.
Okay, so we want people to be able to pay their way out of debt. Like, that's a good thing, right? Like, I want people to be able to pay their way out of debt. And so that's a good thing. And we want people to be able to build up savings. That's a good thing. And I don't think it's up to us to decide that one person should get, say, a different amount because they are in, say, greater need than the other person who is considered to be not as much. Because then we're deciding to make all these differences, and we're deciding to draw these lines. And then, of course, you're drawing these lines, and there's always going to be people right on the other side of it that it hurts because they're not getting anything.
Yeah, you said that, but in that scenario I just described to you, like, we have other programs that would address his brother's situation. Like there's we're trying to do the debt forgiveness, right? Like Bernie Sanders has this program.
Right, that's not what I'm talking about.
Right, so my thing, see, that's the thing. I think UBI, specifically the Freedom Dividend, should be more focused, more surgically focused on a specific set of people. Like, I don't look at the debt forgiveness thing, Scott, and even think about single moms, or I don't think about disabled veterans, or I'm just thinking about people who are going to school and who have a lot of debt. So I think we need to focus specifically on groups that are disadvantaged in their particular plight, and not try to do everything within one program. I just feel like UBI, I feel like the Freedom Dividend it just takes too much. It tries to do too much, and at the same token, it's letting others who won't benefit as much. Now, I want to believe, Scott, I want to believe that you're. This is a quote from you, right? And I read this, and I was like, wow, I want your response because it's kind of interesting. You said progressives need to accept the conditional programs aren't progressive. They are paternalistically neoliberal. The most progressive thing to do is to lift everyone up without conditions and remove the conditions of the cash and cash-like welfare benefits already being received. I don't think it's paternalistic, brother, to help those people who have been historically disenfranchised in this country. And when you talk about fairness, to me, that would be fair. If I walk in, I see one house on fire, that's the house I'm going to put the water on. It's not, both houses don't need the water, Scott.
Okay, so this is a good example actually from, this is what was learned from the basic income experiment in Kenya, and this is through Give Directly.
Okay.
Are you familiar with Give Directly? Organization focuses on direct unconditional cash transfers. They operate in Kenya and Uganda, and they were doing a lot of experiments or programs there, and now they recently started up a full like UBI experiment. It's like a 12-year experiment.
12 years, wow, sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So one of the things they learned is, so they were when they were just targeting like the poor, and this is before the UBI experiment. They needed to figure out a way of deciding who was like deserving. And so what they would do is they found that a good way to judge this was the type of roof that people had. So if you had like a thatched roof, then you were like poor.
Mm-hmm.
And if you had like a tin roof, then you were well off and you didn't need anything.
Okay. So
as an example of this, they found that there were people in tin roofs that were really poor. But what happened was, let's say maybe they had a family member who like paid for their roof to help them out, or maybe like something destroyed the roof and they needed to get something up.
They hit the lottery or something. Right.
Yeah. So for whatever reason,
right.
Yeah.
Got you. But it wasn't it wasn't a true measurement of their predicament or their financial situation, right?
Right.
Gotcha.
So you can find people that you think are better off and and do not need help, and were really in need of help. And then you can find people who you think really need help, and they're actually happy. They don't really need that. So it's like there's errors on both sides. It's called like false inclusions and false exclusions. And they looked at these even like on a worldwide basis, like across programs across the world. And they found that if you look at, if you try to target the bottom 20%, and let's say you're thinking, all right, my goal is to end, hunger, help like the food insecurity. You would think that if you target the bottom 20%, then you're going to get a large group of that. And they actually found that more people were outside that 20% that were food insecure than were inside that amount that were food insecure. So you excluded actually more people than you otherwise would have, because you didn't cast a wide enough net. And so the reason that UBI works so well is that you are casting a very large net. And again, you're not giving it to everybody. You've got that natural crossover point. So let's say, if you, depending on the taxation method, you've got your crossover point at like $120,000, where they're getting $12,000 a year, but they're actually paying $12,000 a year in new taxes. So they're like, you're neutral. They're not gaining anything. They're at the 0 point. And everyone over that is actually net payers. They're essentially paying for their own basic income. Right. And everyone below $120,000 is receiving an amount. And of course, if you're right below that $120,000, then let's say you're a net recipient of like $100 per month. You're getting a little bit, but it's not a lot. The full amount, the full $12,000 amount, is going to the very bottom, and then it's kind of sloping down as the net distribution goes down to the natural crossover point. So you're getting everybody, but the maximum is going to the bottom, and it's scaling down accordingly. And that just works out really well, because you're making sure that you're not excluding anybody that you want to make sure to include.
Okay. Well, you know what? I think we've gone as far as we can on that. I would like to ask you, though, brother, why not the federal jobs guarantee? When I hear Andrew talk about UBI, he talks about, and you've done it tonight as well, you mentioned, MLK, and MLK supported it. But he also supported the federal jobs program as well. And me, I'm a Washingtonian. So there was this mayor, you may have heard of him. His name is Mayor Marion Barry. And everybody referred to Marion Barry, as the crack mayor because he smoked crack. But people outside of D.C. didn't understand. Now, I lived in Maryland. I was born in D.C. I grew up in Maryland, right across the street from D.C., basically, in the part of Maryland that I'm in. And I was envious of the D.C. kids, man, because the D.C. kids got something that we didn't get in Maryland. They got summer jobs, federal government summer jobs. They all became interns. Us in Maryland, we had to fend for ourselves, and it was always very hard. The unemployment rate for black teens in inner cities is off the charts, brother. So I don't know how it is in other locations, but for us, it was always high. So I have a hard time understanding why a federal jobs program doesn't make sense. Why is it an either or type of situation? When I've seen the benefit firsthand. I live in, once again, I'm in Maryland. There are a lot of people who work federal jobs. And when I hear Andrew kind of describe it, he's like, well, you might as well everybody put on their gray jumpsuits now, like they're working for Stalin or something. There are a lot of people who love their federal jobs, man, here in D.C., man. There are a lot of contractors who fight for those jobs. They love those jobs. They pay pretty well. They got great benefits. They're medical, everything. So in a nutshell, brother, what, in your opinion, why is UBI better than a federal jobs program?
Well, so I think that your basic income is your primary thing. That's where we should start at. And so even I suggest that everybody even read Martin Luther King's the chapter in his book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos Our Community, and read the entire chapter, because it's really good, of course, and it's just fascinating to get into this. So he referred to when he spoke about jobs and income, he effectively said we should guarantee income, and we should guarantee everyone a job, and if that doesn't make any sense, essentially, then we should do income. But he also made a point of saying that after all this time, when we're talking about poverty and eliminating it, we keep doing it indirectly. We keep trying to fix it by some other way. And instead of just doing it directly, which is just making sure people have enough income. And so that's your primary thing, is that when you look at the benefit of jobs, a lot of it is because it's providing income. That's what people need, and you're attaching the work to it. And it's not that work is bad. We absolutely do need meaning in our lives. You need to find this stuff. But the most important thing is this money. You need to have this starting amount of income that it actually enables work to happen. If you imagine when you go to work every day, what's the first thing that you do? Well, usually people have breakfast. You need to eat first, and then you work. And so you have to actually have an amount to start with before you can do the work. And so you have to have that primary foundational floor platform, and then you can be talking about work on top of it. And again, it's the unconditionality of it too, and the bargaining power. So people right now, you're effectively coerced into these employer-employee relationships, and they have no power. So they're able to accept poverty wages because they have no choice. They will literally accept whatever the government mandates as the floor, and the business will pay them as less as they possibly can, the smallest amount they legally can. And the person will accept it because they just have no power to say no.
Right.
So it's really important that you have that element into it, because then people are choosing the work that actually makes sense for them. They're not just choosing any work they can find because they need the income. What we want people to do is find the work that's best for them. And that can be government jobs. There's nothing stopping us. And I agree that we should do, especially from a Green New Deal lens, we should invest in jobs that are not being done, and we should do them. The sticking point that I have is the guarantee part. A jobs program, great, especially if we have a determined task we want to complete. We want to mobilize around doing this, and so we need this amount of people for that, and that's what we should do. If our goal is jobs, then it's not the same thing as having a goal of a task being done. You can, let's say, if your goal is jobs, then when you build something like a bridge or something, it would make sense to have 1,000 people working on it, and maybe they're using shovels instead of massive automation equipment and whatever, because the goal of it is to do jobs. But we want to make sure that that's not the goal. The goal is to actually get stuff done as efficiently as possible, as quickly as possible, as high quality as possible. And so that's kind of the guarantee part of it that I don't like, because that's focused on that. And I also think that we need to be refocusing on work itself, how we define it, and the time involved in it.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I just want to interject there.
yeah,
I agree with you that it shouldn't just be, well, you got to get this job and you take a crap job that you don't want because this is federally mandated at this point for you to have this job that you can't stand. That's
right.
kind of defeating the purpose. And I agree with you there, Scott. It's just that I see there are rewards to work. There are rewards to picking a career. I almost went into the Army and they had you fill out the thing and, well, what kind of job best suits you? And you choose, you choose the boxes or whatever, and then they kind of place you on a position. So I don't want to get too hung up on that, but I will say maybe it's not an either or with you, Scott. Like you see the value of, because you heard the thing with Bernie that he made the comment, the value of work, and that kind of became sort of what started this interview process, Scott, where people were saying, well, they didn't think Bernie was right to suggest that people should have a job as opposed to UBI. You think Bernie was wrong, or you think it can be both? Which one is it?
Yeah, so I guess part of this conversation is we need to look at what we mean by like work and jobs, and the purpose of work and jobs, which I would say is meaning. What we're aiming for purpose. And so imagine a Venn diagram with work and jobs and meaning. And so you can have a job and it cannot be meaningful, and it can even really not even be work. You can have work that doesn't count as a job and it's not meaningful. You can have work that isn't meaningful or a job. There's a lot of separation there, and I would say we would want to find that like kind of sweet spot where you're finding meaningful work that is a job, or maybe even is not a job and is unpaid. And so that's the thing that I think Bernie misses out on, is that unpaid work is extremely valuable. I would argue that it can be considered the most valuable of all, especially if you're looking at unpaid care work at home. And so if you look at, say, a mother and she's raising her kid, and I would call that valuable work. And you could look at a guaranteed job and you could say, well, that's not work. But if she watches somebody else's kid, then that is work. And if the other person watches her kid, then that's work. And so you could look at two people watching each other's kid and being paid for it. And those are two jobs. It's adding to GDP, and it's considered to be like better. But I would argue that's not. That it would be better to just enable people to choose to raise their own kids in the ways that they choose, and for that to be valued. And I don't think Bernie values that. And that's what I'm disappointed that he doesn't speak that way.
I don't think it was articulated to him in that way, like you just articulated. I agree with you.
Yeah.
I think that, Andrew Yang uses the example of his wife with the autistic child. Yeah. I think that's a job, brother.
Yeah.
And I think that would, I don't see that as a UBI. I see it as a job where we can have a classification for you being a caregiver of a special needs child, whether it's your child or anybody else's child, and there'll be a salary attached to that. We come up with other jobs. There'll be a classification for it. That's how I see it.
So I get the reasoning behind that. And then so that the tricky situation there again. So let's say we're deciding that is considered an actual job, and so we're going to pay someone for being like a parent. We're going to say you are a parent, you meet these qualifications, and so then we have to look at like the variety. So are you not a parent if you're, let's say, watching your kid on weekends, or let's say you're getting some assistance, and how do you clock in like being a parent and not? Like, what if you're a parent? What if you're doing this care work for 15 hours a week? Somehow clocking that versus like 50 hours a week. And then do we pay parents differently based on how much time that they're putting in, and maybe like how many kids that they have, or let's say if their kid is disabled, do they get more? And so like we're like getting into this kind of core thing that I would argue that we shouldn't be. We should just be saying, look, unconditionally, everyone should receive this amount no matter what. And we are recognizing that people are doing unpaid valuable work. And it can be a lot of different things besides parenting as well.
But Scott, say that mom say she's not married to Andrew Yang, and let's just say she's a single mom, man.
Yeah, so $12,000 a year.
And she's already getting some type of government assistance. She's screwed. Which brings me back to my point.
Yeah, well, not necessarily. We're not necessarily screwed, because again, like we said before, the existing programs that she has are, let's say, not allowing her to be a parent. Maybe she is doing this job search thing and she has to do 30 hours per week,
Okay.
and she has to put her kid in childcare in order to go do that. And so, like, these conditions are having these other effects that we need to look at. But I really want to just kind of double down on just how important it is for people to be able to pursue the work that's most important to them. And
But Scott, how many people know what's most important to them or what's the best job?
that's
Like you
exactly.
may know, you may
don't
know
know.
that.
Yeah,
know?
no, yeah, it's a journey. It's a search. It's something that we spend our lives doing, and you can find something, and maybe you didn't expect it to be especially meaningful, but it turned out that way. But otherwise, if you look at like the engagement rates right now in the U.S., so you look at the engagement rates, only 1/3 of people are engaged by their jobs in the U.S. 2/3 of people are disengaged actively or partially. And imagine, what are the effects on productivity of all these people who are in these jobs? And another book I recommend people look into is Bullshit Jobs by David Graeber. It's a great book. And the theory that he gets into there, and he categorizes these various, he makes up different categories for what counts as a bullshit job and what it entails. And the idea is that there's a lot of jobs that exist out there that only exist for essentially the income or for purposes of, that are completely useless, like, let's say, checking boxes or a duct taper, where he only exists because someone else is messing up and they have to, do it that. But so these are people who feel that their jobs are entirely useless, but these jobs exist. So at the conclusion of that book is saying, well, how do we fix this weird happenstance where we're creating all these jobs that don't need to exist, and people hate them and they're entirely useless, but they need them. So the question, well, you have to decouple income from work. You have to make it so people can choose not to do those jobs. They can get out of that and say, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to find something else. So if you enable people to actually search for things, and this was actually another result from the experiments in the 70s, where you didn't see a decrease in primary earners working less because of the guaranteed income. What you did is you found primary earners spending more time between jobs looking for the next job. So you're saying that, instead of just grabbing the first job you could find because you need that money, you were saying, okay, I've got these skills and I want to find a job that utilizes these skills. I also want to find a job that pays this much. I'm hoping for a $50,000 job.
You get into the area of self-actualization now and finding oneself. And that's cool, but I think a lot of people want to be rappers and DJs and comic book artists and a lot of other stuff. Laura Lion Gate, now you put up a good point, because what about our folks who aren't American citizens who are here? Undocumented people. Those people do not qualify for the Freedom Dividend, do they?
Yeah, this is how I would design it too, especially in the U.S. and especially to start, because we have to start somewhere, and we already use this. Like, not everybody can vote. You don't cross the border and you don't gain the ability to vote. You have to be a citizen to vote. And so if you tie that to that, it's basically the same way. You're saying that if you are a citizen of the United States, then you receive this as a right of citizenship. And if you come into the country and you immigrate, you can get there. It is possible to become a citizen, and the process can be, expensive. It can be long. It can be 5 to 10 years or so on average. But it is possible to eventually get there and gain your citizenship. And it also you can look at this as incentivizing legal immigration too, because people are fearing, oh my gosh, if we provide a basic income, then suddenly you'd have like this influx of immigrants coming in to try to get the money.
Yeah, Scott.
Yeah,
you're giving away $12,000 a year per 18-year-old person.
Right. So, and that you could argue that if you get it as soon as you cross the border, but you don't. You have to be a citizen, and so if you're undocumented, then of course you're not going to get it because you're undocumented. You actually have to become documented and go through the process of gaining the citizenship. So effectively, you can incentivize legal immigration through a basic income that is provided to citizens.
Yeah, you would definitely do that. I heard Andrew Yang said he was tightening up our border security, no doubt, if this was enacted. I think this is my last question. One of the things that Mr. Yang said was that part of the reason why we need this is the automation, the robotics, the AI that are displacing workers. And I was really moved by that, man, when he told me a story, because I interviewed him, and he was telling me about the workers and the truckers and how how their jobs are going away, and he spent time with them, he talked to them. And he talked about Amazon, and he talked about Facebook, and he talked about, and my thing is, why don't we just tax those sons of bitches, Scott? Like, tax the corporations who are displacing the workers. And we don't need this. We don't need to. We don't need this big program. Let's just get these bastards to kick in their money where they need to pay. Let's get them to pay their taxes and stop dodging the tax code.
Right. So let's say you get them to pay their taxes, and so what does it do? Like it goes into the existing programs that we've been discussing that have all these issues. The important part for me that I see this is to make things unconditional, and they should be paying. It is a problem that you have these ginormous trillion-dollar companies that are not paying federal income taxes, and we're effectively subsidizing. It's a problem that they're even earning income off of our data.
Right.
We're the ones generating all of this value, and they're capturing it. And so one of the things I like too about Yang's platform is he's talking about data as a property right. And I think that as we go into the future, that's a really important aspect, because I believe that Facebook should already be paying us a dividend, for our data. And if this, I'm interested in seeing what's the first company to actually start doing that too, because I think that it could spread. If the trick against creating a Facebook competitor is, of course, the network effect. You have this problem where the value of Facebook is created by the fact that there's so many people using it. Wow. And so a new competitor faces this really virtually impossible barrier of how do you get 1 billion people to become part of your network instead of Facebook's network. And I think that there is an element here that could make a valuable new social network because it pays people. And so if you're able to create a network that pays people sufficiently well, that they say, oh, well, why am I using Facebook that's misusing my data? I'm going to use this instead. And then all of a sudden, that company could possibly compete against Facebook. Is Facebook going to last forever? It could be the next MySpace. I don't know. But I think a company like that could do it. And then I think that could spread. Once you set the precedent that people are used to earning a dividend based on their value as data creators, then other companies have to do that too. People start getting used to it. They're saying that they're no longer going to give away their value for free. And I think that's a really important precedent to make as we go into the future. And then another aspect of this too is that we need to recognize that we're the ones who paid for a lot of this technology in the research and design phase, decades ago. Most research, actually practically all research, level 1 initial research, is publicly funded. And so we publicly fund this research, and it goes off. You could even say this with self-driving cars. This started with DARPA, with the DARPA competition. This was a defense program where they had this competition to create the self-driving car. And so that goes off into the private wilderness, and you've got companies utilizing this, and suddenly they become, the next trillion-dollar company. And what do we see? Where's our return on investment as taxpayers who invested in this technology? We're not getting anything. And so we need to understand that is our value too, that we should be getting that. And as we go into this future, and as we have more and more technology and more automation, I think that we need to understand, we could even see this as like a technological inheritance. This is something that technology is built upon all the generations previous, and it's building up and up and up. And then here we are, and this is ours. Where else should it go? If all these companies and all this value it's generating, it shouldn't just stay up there. It should go to us. And in what form should it be? It should be in the form of something without conditions. It should be liberating. It should be our income, just like stockholders receive dividends. It's up to us to make that happen.
Well, I hear you, man, Scott. I think we're gonna have to just agree to disagree on slightly, on some points here. But I do believe that you're an honest actor, brother, and that you believe that this would better our society, and you provide evidence to how you're thinking, what your thinking is, how you process this. And I just appreciate the fact you sat down and explained it so that people can get a clear picture. For me, just so my audience knows, I'm having a hard time getting past the fact that we're giving it to everyone. I think that people, there are people who need our assistance. I understand your rationale, but there are people who would need it more than others. Those are who we should focus that help to. And as far as the pushback we get from society, Scott, brother, I'm sorry, but I just think we're going to get that all the time. There are people who are not going to get on board, and if we have a UBI system, I'm afraid that people will leave the social safety nets. They'll opt into it. Then we'll have the Republican lawmakers cut those safety nets. And then because we're giving the UBI to everybody, they'll say, well, you don't really need that either. And then they'll start cutting that safety net. And then what do we have? I just think it's a slippery slope. I don't trust that UBI that it would be there for all of these services that we need. Look at Trump now, man. He's cut social safety nets drastically.
Oh yeah, but now look at Social Security too. And Social Security is a universal program that everyone expects to receive, and it's essentially untouchable by politicians. They keep trying to. They want to say privatize it. They want to, measure it, the COLA rate in a different way. Like they want to do these things, but the fact is that seniors quite actually have a lot of power, and I think it's enhanced by the fact that they do have Social Security. And so if you see basic income as Social Security for all, you can see that it's going to be a lot stronger program. Trump can do all these things with these poverty programs because, again, programs for the poor are poor programs. People think, oh, people who are poor deserve it. They made their mistakes. I'm not going to make a mistake. I don't need to worry about that. I'm fine. They, screw them.
Right.
And so that's how all these erosions happen because of the targeting. It's the universality that we need in order to strengthen these programs. That's how you're able to make these programs last and lasting, and people feel that they all have buy-in to it.
I hear you, man. Scott, tell people where to go to find out more about you and your work.
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter at Scott Santens, and also you can subscribe to my newsletter, and that's scottsantens.news. And my blog is at scottsantens.com.
Well, Scott, after this conversation, I'm going to have the MMT people. They're going to be like, Tim, you better let us on and talk now. If you don't, Tim, we coming for you with pitchforks. I just want to shout out some of the people who provided information. I didn't read. I have a list of names. Nate Laspana, Monty O.G., Damian Pinston, Reeve Barker, William Rupert, Michael Cruz, Jack Albrecht, Guz Echevera, Cheveri, Laura Thate, and John Kelly. They all contributed to the questions I asked in no particular order. I just kind of used them all together in one to kind of like give this conversation some type of guidance. But hey, man, Scott, man, thank you for sitting down, brother. I appreciate you, man.
Oh, no, thank you so much, Tim. And, I just love that we can sit down and talk about ideas like this. And it's really, I think, an improvement upon the traditional media that we're evolving into, where we actually have this ability to interact and speak in long form and really dive into these ideas instead of just these kind of sound bites and little shallow kind of conversations. So thank you so much for having me on.
Demonizing one another too. That's what happens, man. There are a couple people that kind of they threw $1 or two. There is a mayor says no one left out, huh? How about prisoners or ex-cons? I don't think that's any condition. Am I correct, Scott?
Yeah, so this is definitely going to be part of the conversation, and I would prefer that people in prison actually receive a basic income, but I know that would be really difficult. But the thing is that as soon as they exit prison, they are absolutely going to get basic income, and I think that's going to have a massive effect on recidivism rates, because I think a lot of people go back into prison because, again, they can't find employment. They effectively are locked out of the economy once you go into prison. That's a big problem. So I think basic income will actually have a hugely positive effect on that.
Gotcha. Shannon Owen says she doesn't hate it. She just disagrees. Mayors, people who understand M&T reject UBI. Yeah, we get that. Some people saying I got to bring on Steve Grumbine. I don't think I'm going to bring on Steve. I don't have a good relationship with Steve. And Preach Scott. MK said, Preach Scott. So we got some people out here who support you. Yang Gang Love, Shanna and MK, and a couple other. And yeah, a lot of love from that. All right, that's it. All right, guys, I'll see you tomorrow for Freedom Friday. Hey, look, guys, if you had a question, you didn't get it, call in tomorrow to the show. The phone lines will be open, and it'll be your time to talk. I'm Tim Black for Tim Black Show. I'll see you tomorrow. Until then, take care.
Thanks, Tim.
All right, Scott. And end meeting.